Hi there, I'm Ty Houghton, and for those of you that don't know me, I'm a Preservation Evoker player who specialises in Mythic Plus content. With the hero talent trees being released, I wanted to do a couple of videos because there aren't really any people that make preservation YouTube videos these days. So I thought it would be good to give an overview of my current thoughts about how these are shaping up from a Preservation Evoker point of view. Predominantly around Mythic Plus. So I want to go through them, and I've got some notes on the side if any of you want to follow along. First things first, I'm going to cover the most recently released tree, the Flameshaper, which was called the Ruby Adept before. So this is primarily based around the Engulf ability here, which is a 20-second cooldown. It looks to be used mainly as a spot heal, and the tooltip reads, engulf your target in Dragon Flame, damaging or healing them. For each of your periodic effects on the target, effectiveness is increased by 50%. So the idea being here that you can have several heal over times rolling across a particularly vulnerable person or your entire group, and you can use this to help spot heal. It does require some ramp. From the tooltip, it looks to be instant cast, but seeing some of these, that may not be completely accurate. That's, all of this is subject to change. It works in a similar way to Druid's Swift Mend. And it's a little difficult to judge the power of this ability based on this without any sort of spell power, multipliers or anything like that. You'd expect it not to heal much baseline or with just one heal over time. I think ideally you're expected to be using these on players with 2 heals over time or more. It does quite heavily encourage Echo into Reversion to give you 2 baseline heal over times, especially if you have Grace Period, which will give you another 30% healing to that person. And you can then follow that up with Engulf for presumably a fairly chunky heal. If you have any other heal over times, which we'll get into in a bit as well, then it'll only increase that further. This is on a 20-second cooldown, which is a little longer than Verdant Embrace, which is one of our main spot heal tools in a Mythic Plus environment. It is one more CD for Preservation Evoker to track, and as I'm sure you're aware if you're watching this, Preservation Evoker is a very heavily CD-based class, so it will be one more thing for you to add to weak auras or to track if you choose to use this hero talent tree. With the effectiveness increases here, I think the largest multiplier that you could feasibly get at any one time is if you were to Echo, which will give you 1 heal over time from Enkindle, which we'll cover in a bit. Then you Dragon Breath, so that's echoed, so you have 2 Dragon Breaths rolling. You could also have an Echo into Reversion to have you 2 reversions going, or that may have carried over from a previous point in the encounter, and that would give you 250% total effectiveness bonus on this, or 5 times the base value. That doesn't include anything like Grace Period or Mastery or other talents that we'll get into in a bit. So I imagine that the variation on how much this heals will really depend on how well you're ramping and managing your heal over time tools. So let's go through each of these and explain how they could be used, or in case of the choice nodes, what you may choose in certain situations. So the leftmost top we have a choice node between Trailblazer and Shape of the Flame. Trailblazer reads, hover and deep breath travel 50% faster, and hover travels 50% further. For this, I think one of the underrated parts about this choice node is the deep breath being faster. If you've been playing Evoker of any kind for any length of time, you will have killed yourself with deep breath. You know, you'll start it off perhaps slightly further away than you should be. You'll kick it off, and then a ground effect will spawn in the direction that you're flying, or you'll realise that as soon as you started this off, you need to heal someone urgently, something like that, and it can cause death. So the 50% faster on this is potentially going to make this a safer ability to use. The hover part travelling 50% further, I think this is a bit more niche. So hover does move you a certain distance at the moment that is normally enough to get outside of any ground effect or anything targeted on you. Because these have to be made for classes with fewer movement tools, and Evoker doesn't really lack movement. You know, even if you're out of hover charges, you can spam your jump key to give yourself a little boost forward with your racial abilities and so on. So I feel like that's not necessarily required, and I can see quite a few Evokers ending up killing themselves with this by, you know, hovering, not taking the extra distance into account, and shooting off the edge of a platform or into something even more dangerous. It will be interesting to see people taking this, hovering, and then ending up butt pulling another pack in M+, because they've shot across the room. The other node that this, or the other option that this choice node has, is Shape of Flame. So tail swipe and wing buffet scorch enemies and blind them with ash, causing their next attack within 4 seconds to miss. So my thoughts around this one is it presumably only works on mobs that can be knocked up, so any lieutenant mobs in M+, that often have the most dangerous attacks, this won't have an effect on. It's also unclear whether this also affects ability casts or whether it's just auto attacks. I imagine this works in a similar way to Exploding Keg that Bone Dust Brew have, that Brewmasters have access to. But that doesn't actually cause the attacks to miss. It used to, but they've now changed it so the attacks do no damage when they hit you, because it meant that people were able to avoid debuffs and so on. So it's interesting that they've added this and not made it the same as Bone Dust as Exploding Keg for Brewmasters. If it does affect abilities, there's quite a lot of gaming that could be done around this. And depending on your talent choices in your class tree, you will have one of these two likely on a 45-second cooldown and the other on a 90-second cooldown. So they're available fairly frequently. Okay, let's move on down this left-hand side. The Conduit of Flame is the second node here. Critical strike chance against targets above 50% health is increased by 10%. So this is quite useful for reversion uptime, particularly if you've got low crit. They have recently changed reversion so that it can only be increased a maximum of 6 times by critical strikes. So it does devalue crit slightly, particularly if you're in a crit heavy build as it stands at the moment, although that is, spoiler, adjusted slightly later on by some of the other crit synergies in this tree. It can also be good for Fire Breath, which you will generally do at the start of a pull on a big group of enemies, into Life Giver's Flame Healing. So you'll effectively have 10% more crit on your Fire Breath, and that will feed into the healing that you do from that. It's not particularly useful for healing throughput, particularly in an M+ environment. Preservation Evoker is quite a bursty healer. You normally end up ramping and then chucking out a big empowered, Spirit Bloom or something like that, and topping everyone off. And people, if you've timed it well, should be below 50%, and you will get them up. So this node would have no effect for those kinds of cases. You will obviously get a little bit of trickle healing from your heal over times and so on, but I don't think this will have a significant throughput increase for healing itself, although anything is nice. Moving over to the third one here. On the left hand side, Titanic Precision. Living Flame, Reversion, and Azure Strike critical strikes have a 100% increased chance to trigger Essence Burst. Now, I don't see many Preservation Evokers using Azure Strike, so I think that is primarily for the Devastation Evoker part of this hero talent. The Living Flame and Reversion is useful. Now, this varies depending a lot on the build that people are running with. If you are running a Spirit Blossom build, then quite often you're fishing for Essence Burst procs to allow you to pump out those blossoms when you need it. That's primarily a raid build. In Mythic Plus, your Living Flame giving you Essence Burst, it's nice, but it's not normally something that you play around. And Reversion, obviously, recently giving Essence Burst is again a nice bonus, but again, you normally use that as part of your ramping into a damage event, so putting out some echoes, something like that. Any Essence Burst that we get is usually a good thing, but quite often in an M+ environment they can just be overwritten or swallowed up. So yeah, minor, nothing game changing, but nice anyway. Moving over to the middle column, we have Travelling Flame here. So this reads much more interesting than I think it will turn out to be. Engulf causes Fire Breath or Dream Breath for preservation to spread to a nearby target. If no valid targets are present, its duration is refreshed. So if we take the first part of this initially, around spreading it to a nearby target, it's quite rare that you're going to want to spread one instance of Fire Breath or Dream Breath to another target, particularly in a M+ environment. It can be useful, presumably, if you have missed someone out of your frontal cone on your Dream Breath or something like that. But I don't think this is a reason that you would be casting the Engulf ability to spread anyway. It's more of a side effect than anything else. It's also a little unclear what it means by valid targets. So this could go down a couple of routes. If it's literally there's no other allies in range, I understand that being no valid targets. But if there are other targets with the same heal over time, are they valid targets, or because they have those same buffs on them, are they considered invalid? It's not entirely clear what's meant by that, but if it's the former of no other allies in range, then that's not often going to be the case. At least in M+. When you're running solo content or something like that, fine. But not too often outside of that. The second node here, Burning Adrenaline. Engulf quickens your pulse, reducing the cast time of your next spell by 30%. It stacks up to 2 charges. So I've got some notes around this one. It helps spot healing quite a bit, which is one of Preservation Evoker's weaknesses. So if you're handling high constant damage on a single target like Bleeds or say Etch in Waycrest Manor, something like that, or the Roots in Waycrest Manor, or the Drown from Throne of Tides. There's a few examples where you need to just pump healing into a target over a certain period of time. It can be quite useful for that. So you could, as mentioned before, have Echo Reversion on a target, and a very basic one would be Echo Reversion, 2 reversions, you hit Engulf for a 100% effectiveness. It will be 150%, but we'll cover why shortly. And you then have 30% cast time for a follow-up spell, so a Living Flame or something like that would be a basic example, or a single target Spirit Bloom. If it's more group damage that's going to be coming out, then this would really benefit 5 stack empowered Spirit Bloom. 30% increased or reduced cast time on that can be really useful in some cases. I'm sure you've all had those moments where you're charging up your Spirit Bloom, you've mistimed it slightly, and it's not going to reach 5 charges before someone dies, so you end up just having to send it. So this would help mitigate those, though it will make those moments of trying to time a Spirit Bloom for a damage event that a little bit more tricky. You have to track whether you have burning adrenaline or not. But it's not a bad problem to have. The third node on the middle row here, or middle column, is Red Hot Engulf. So Engulf gains 1 additional charge and deals 20% increased damage and healing. The damage and healing is nice. Again, we don't know what the baseline is. Theoretically, every character with this hero talent tree will have all of these. So this is could almost be rolled into the base anyway. It wouldn't make too much difference. The only time that you wouldn't have this is during your leveling process, which doesn't matter really. The additional charge aspect of it is quite nice though, and a lot of people don't realise the value that charge based spells have. So if you have just a single charge, you almost want to use it on cooldown so that you're not wasting any instances of the buffs that this gives and so on. Whereas if you have 2 charges, you can always keep one on cooldown, and you don't need to use it the second it comes up before wasting a charge. You can wait till you have 1.5 charges available before using it, and you don't lose any of the CD effectively. So if this does become, this hero talent tree, and Engulf especially, if it does become quite a large throughput increase, then this allows you to save it for damage events much more than if it was just a single charge. So yeah, it's nice. This is a good node. Then the right hand side here, Enkindle. Essence abilities are enhanced with Flame, dealing 20% of healing or damage done as fire over 8 seconds. This one's interesting and needs a little bit of thought around it. So, as a Preservation Evoker, we're mainly going to be triggering these through either Echo or through Blossom. If you're playing a Blossom build and you're in a raid, this 20% healing or damage done over 8 seconds will stack up to be quite a lot. Echo is a relatively minor heal in the grand scheme of things. It helps, but you're not going to get a lot of bonus from the 20% extra healing here. It's mainly from the Echo effect that you get healing throughput, not the heal itself. But these heal over times count towards your Engulf effectiveness increase. So in the case before, where I was talking about doing Echo Reversion, instead of having just the 2 heal over times from Reversion that have been echoed, you will actually have 3 heal over times, the 2 Reversions and the 1 Enkindle from casting Echo. So that would give you 150% effectiveness increase on your Engulf. So yeah, it gives you a way to play around that, and it's just a nice little bonus for ramping properly. And the way that I see Preservation Evoker, particularly in Mythic Plus, is much more a combo healer rather than anything else. So this really ties into that, of thinking, okay, this damage event's coming out, which of my available combos is going to fit into that? Okay, let's do Echo, Reversion, Engulf, and then Living Flame, and that will be enough. And that could be a combo that is going to keep someone alive for a certain thing. And this would pump out a decent amount of healing, just as an example. Moving on, we've got another choice node here. So, Fan the Flames. Engulf reignites Enkindle, extending its duration and effectiveness by 25%. For this one specifically, if you're playing an Echo build, or something similar to that, which I believe most people do for Mythic Plus. Then the effectiveness of the Enkindle is not really going to be a lot. If you've got an Enkindle from casting an Echo, I say it's going to be a fairly small heal over time, over 8 seconds. Increasing its effectiveness by 25% is okay, but it's not going to save anyone really. Neither will increasing the duration. So it's okay, but there are much bigger throughput increases elsewhere. One of those being the other choice node here, Expanded Lungs. So Preservation Evoker actually gets 2 bonuses out of this compared to Devastation Evoker. Devastation only gets the first. So Fire Breath's damage over time is increased by 20%, and Dream Breath's heal over time is increased by 20%. For Preservation Evoker, only that last part, of course. The interesting part here is that this is just the damage and heal over time. This is not the spells altogether. Now, primarily, Preservation Evoker casts Fire Breath at 4 or 5 empowered, depending on whether they're able to do so, because of the Leaping Flames talent that they get, where they also get the Living Flames from casting that. So you wouldn't get a lot of benefit from doing a 1-stack empowered Fire Breath. But yeah, if you do for the sort of constant ticking damage, then you'll get a benefit from this. Depends if there are many rock fights coming out when these hero talents are available. The Dream Breath heal over time, most of the time you're going to be casting this at a 1-stack empowered. So you will get a lot of benefit from this. There are quite a few Dream Breath healing increases throughout the talent tree. One of the historically good builds has been a Dream Breath focused build, and that was in, I believe, Season 2. So those talents are still available, but the tier set at the moment doesn't really lean into it, so we're not doing it for now. But the ones available at the moment are, if you bear with me, so you can get 20% heal over time bonus from that node. Most people run Call of Ysera. For when you use Verdant Embrace, you get 40% bonus on your Dream Breath. And there's a Renewing Breath talent for 30% as well, which is fairly deep in the tree. This one here for 2 points, each at 15%. So you can get a total of 90% bonus, although 20% of that's for the hot only, not for the instant damage, instant healing. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think even without leaning fully into a Dream Breath build, the 20% bonus is going to make a decent amount of difference, particularly on rot damage. So yeah, nice one. And out of those 2 choice nodes, I think the Expanded Lungs is going to be far more common unless there are some tweaks here, which is likely. The final non-capstone talent here is the defensive node of Life Cinders, where Renewing Blaze also applies to 1 nearby injured ally when cast. This one sounds amazing, but without a little bit more info, it's difficult to say how strong this will be. There's some RNG on who this gets cast on. It says injured ally. If you use this before a damage event where everyone's topped off, does that mean no one else gets it? So you could potentially lose value that way. And most of the time, particularly as Preservation Evoker, you want to be able to control who you're really leaning into to try and save. Let's say you've got a squishy enhanced shaman on the team, you would really want this to go on them during certain encounters, and there's very little way of controlling that. So it has a really high ceiling, this choice, in terms of how good it could be, but I don't think it's going to quite live up to that, at least in this current iteration. The other option here is Draconic Instincts. Your wounds have a small chance to cauterize, healing you for 30% of damage taken. It occurs more often from attacks that deal high damage. This one's quite interesting, and I think it's a little better than it sounds, though it could be even better. So the proc chance on this is a little vague. It would be good to understand quite how often this is going to happen. It actually increases the value of mastery, because it means that on a damage event where this does proc, you're likely going to be higher percent HP than your allies. So it'll mean any heals that you are putting out will be doing your mastery bonus in increased healing. Yeah, that's not something that's very obvious from how this is worded, but it's a nice little bonus, really. It would be better if it was predictable but lower amount to ensure that you could hook into that mastery bonus. So, for example, whenever you take a damage event, it heals for 5% of the damage taken rather than the 30%. But it happens all the time, something like that. Would in a lot of rot damage cases, this would be doing minimal healing, but it would really allow you to help you keep your HP above your allies and getting your mastery benefit, especially if you're using your defensives properly. Okay, and finally the capstone talent, Consume Flame. So for preservation, Engulf consumes 8 seconds of Dream Breath from the target, detonating it and healing all nearby targets equal to 300% of the amount consumed, reduced beyond 5 targets. This is interesting, though I feel a little disappointing. So there's perhaps an unclear interaction here between Echo and Dream Breath. If you have double Dream Breath on a target and you use Engulf, will this consume and benefit from both? Will it consume both and only benefit from one? Or will it only consume and benefit from the one Dream Breath? This also interacts with haste quite nicely, because at a base level with 0 haste, Dream Breath ticks over 16 seconds every 2 seconds. So 8 seconds of Dream Breath is effectively 4 ticks of Dream Breath. So that equates to, at least from the current implementation of the spell and tooltips, 153.6 spell power. That's slightly more healing than an Echo cast, which is about 120% spell power. So it's not a huge amount of healing, though remember this does happen at the same time that you're doing the spot healing from Engulf, and any other effects that are happening at that time. This happens in an area, though we don't know quite how close targets need to be. And my main issue with this is Preservation Evokers are really good at healing stack targets, which this leans further into. What Preservation Evokers really need are abilities to be able to heal people outside of their frontal cones and outside of a stacked circle, or even at range, beyond 25 yards. So yeah, this leans a little in the wrong direction for me. I don't think it'll be a huge amount of healing, but it seems like a nice side effect. Yeah, it's okay. It does, for this effect, require Dream Breath on the target. In a Mythic Plus environment in combat, you typically have about a 60 to 70% uptime on Dream Breath. So it's not like you would get this all the time. You would need to make sure, again, that you have ramped properly or you're using this at an appropriate time. And the other question I have around this one is, can Engulf be echoed? And if so, does this effect also echo? If you can stack up on a target a load of heal over times, chuck an echo on them, get a double Engulf and double Consume Flame, does that then take 16 seconds of Dream Breath, which is the full duration? Yeah, difficult to say. Um, yeah, I mean, overall, this is a decent looking hero talent tree. Um, it has quite a few interactions and allows for some interesting combos or thinking about different ways that we could be using some abilities. I'd like to see some tweaks, and as I'm sure most other classes, some further elaboration on the scaling and effects of some of these spells. Um, but yeah, this seems good. I would give this an A or B plus. If you want to let me know your thoughts, anything I haven't covered, please feel free to comment in the video. And yeah, if you guys like videos like this, I will look to get more done. Thanks. Bye bye.